Moving slightly on now, having discussed the types of culture, one of the ways in an organization, one of the ways we can analyze organizational cultures is with regard to the domains of sociability versus solidarity. Sociability is when employees are very connected to each other, get along very well, mutually supportive. There's a lot of interpersonal citizenship behavior. There is a lot of organizational citizenship behavior. They may well socialize with each other within the organization. They may also socialize with each other outside of the organization. So that pertains to overall the extent to which they get along with each other, the extent to which they are encouraged to get along and interact with each other, okay, in terms of sociability. Now, solidarity is slightly different, and it's not the way in which we usually understand it. So solidarity is the extent to which they think alike. So it's not about sociability in this sense, it's the extent to which they think alike. They have the same ideas, the same values, the same way of being. So if we examine this diagram adapted from Goffey and Jones there, a mercenary culture is a culture where everybody thinks in the same way, but they are not mutually supportive. They don't support each other. They're much more competitive towards each other. So a mercenary culture is low on sociability, but high on solidarity, because everybody believes in the competition. Everybody believes that it's everybody against each other. Now, obviously, when we look at this, not one organization may or may not fit directly into one of these four boxes, and I think we have to be very careful, slotting organizations into a particular box. So what I'd like to do now, it's 11:16, is to have a 5-minute breakout again and focus on the questions here now and the breakout sessions. So what are the key dimensions of Enron's culture? And what are the implications of employee behavior? And also significantly, how was that culture maintained? How was that culture maintained? And what I'd also, just as an add-on, so these are some general questions around the culture, I would also like you to consider during your discussions the impact of organizational stories. So the impact of organizational stories on the development and the maintenance of an organizational culture. So it's 11:17 now. If we can reconvene at 11:23, please, Daniel, if we can just have random breakout groups, that would be okay. Thanks very much. Any ideas or impressions there based on that last clip that we saw? Also pertaining to how those culture was maintained and the role perhaps of stories in building organizational culture. Okay, yeah, Julian?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this just sort of come across as, the most in group with Jeff Skilling were the ones that were invited along to these legendary weekends, so that they created kind of a legend in themselves around that. So I think it just because that was the talk and people would know that that's kind of your private bonding session with Jeff Skilling. By nature, that created that kind of impetus for people to want to aspire to to getting into that inner sanctum.
I think so, and these, like you say, these little cadres of people who go off, and then I think, when they went off on these things and came back with these stories of somebody almost being killed and somebody being stitched up, and how that feeds back again, doesn't it, into that organizational culture.
Yeah, and we're saying in our group, but I think it was kind of, I guess, in that kind of male-dominated, environment. It's probably this sense of, fear of missing out, and it just
Yes.
naturally become the thing that you felt you had to do, or you wanted to aspire to.
Absolutely. So you can't opt out. What is the what happens if you don't want to go on one of these biking things?
Yeah, exactly.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Thanks, Julian. Mara and then Matt. Mara?
Yes, our group also talked about that macho culture and the boys' club, and yeah, we laughed because in the previous breakout discussion we talked about Hitler, and I'm probably the only one who can mention this, but it's a person who's extremely inspiring and extremely manipulative and very rhetorical, and suddenly there's something happens where everybody just follows. And back to what Jesse said, if that's used in the wrong environment, it can be extremely dangerous. So I'm not trying to compare Hitler with Skinner, but I think they have very similar traits. It's that you're either in it with me or you're out. And we were saying in this instant, you're out just means you lose your job and you're out of the company. But with Hitler, it meant you're out. You're also on the concentration camp. There was there was fear. There was a huge fear that went with it, and you either were with it or you said nothing.
Yeah, exactly. So what is, and there's a penalty here, isn't there, in terms of what is possible.
And my husband used to do real estate sales, and that was very similar culture. They were in the top 10, and if you were the top salesman, you got onto these amazing trips where you spent amazing amount of monies, and strippers and women were always involved. And it's just another way of putting the power. Look, I'm so powerful. I can even play with these other humans.
Yes, and it's that power surge, isn't it? Which is very, very, very interesting. Thank you, Matt.
Hi, yeah. So we thought that Lou Pai was definitely the best example of their culture. I mean, he was never at work. He made heaps of money, and he disappeared before anything really blew up. I mean, and he sold all his shares and walked away because he knew the company was just a shell that had no real value.
Yeah, and he was
the smartest one in the room. I mean,
yeah, absolutely, very interesting. And look how Lou Pai was actually never charged. He took the Fifth Amendment. He had to sell a lot of stuff in the end. I suppose as a way of getting out of it, but certainly he was never charged, so he did, as far as I'm aware, he didn't do any jail time. So look how clever he was. I thought it was interesting with those stories that were circulating about him, though, and how that fed back into that organizational culture. In terms of some organizations, if we can see how the stories of what managers have done, or even the stories about what other employees done, and how that feeds back into an organizational culture.
Well, I think the stories that get popular like that are the ones that reinforce the cultural values. So if Enron was all about surviving and making money, and not so much about how much time you spent in the office. I mean, here's this Lou Pai guy who spends all his at night and runs a farcical division that makes heaps of money. I mean, here's your cultural icon. There's all the values distilled into one man.
Absolutely, and so this guy, he's at a management meeting and he's bragging about this thing he's got going with his stripper, with strippers. The idea is bringing so it feeds into this very dominant, I think, macho organizational culture And so we see then how cultures start to be, they are perpetuated through stories. And oftentimes I think another issue with organizational culture is how they may well be perpetuated even by the landscape of the office. You know, the pictures that are put up on the wall, you know, is it an open workplace? Are the closed doors? Are the floors where, you know, you're not allowed to go up to the senior management suite without a prior approval or a prior appointment? You know, the dress code, for example. We think about things like, you know, the way people dress in organizations, how that impacts on the organizational culture and how employees are behaving.